G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. So before the video begins, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who liked and commented on the previous video. It was totally unexpected by me to see so many people come out from the woodworks and support me. And the likes and the comments you guys left made a huge difference with subscriptions and views increasing massively for that particular video. This whole YouTube thing as a career can be a pretty scary thing sometimes. But it was so reassuring to see so many people having my back at the first sign of trouble. It was also awesome that so many of you said that from now on you'd be liking and commenting on every video. Honestly guys, thank you so much. Without all of you guys, I wouldn't be here where I am. And I believe that with all of your help, we can take this channel somewhere amazing. So to keep the momentum up, if you do enjoy the video, it would really help to drop a like and comment below to help me out. But with that all said, and without further ado, let's begin.
Number 6.
Yesterday on Thanksgiving, I woke up from having slept late and wanted to go for a walk in the park before the sun went down. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a van next to me. There was a woman outside the passenger door of the van. She whirled around at me and stared at me for about 6 seconds. Her face was completely cracked out. It had that sunken reptile look. Her eyes were absolutely dead. I could tell that she was completely out of it. In the driver's seat was a greasy looking man. He was just staring at me. I got out of the car and wasn't too worried yet because this park is kind of on a busy street. I began walking towards the path that led me into the park while constantly looking behind me. The crackheads were now in their van, rooting around for something. As I made my way further into the park, the sun began fading fast. I was also upset because I really looked forward to walking in the park for stress relief. But the darker it got, I kept worrying that the couple were following me or waiting around the next bend for me. Finally, I gave up any chance of enjoying this stroll and decided to return to my car. This is where it gets doubly odd. As I exited the trees and made my way back to my car, I saw the van. At this point, I was about 2 minutes from my car. The woman was outside the passenger door again, only this time the man was standing next to her. She began making sharp, high-pitched meowing noises and then moaning. Then a blue light appeared before my feet and kind of danced back and forth in front of my feet. The guy was holding a flashlight and shining it through the van windows directly in front of me. Every internal alarm I had was going off, but both the woman and the man were watching me with dead eyes, the woman still meowing. I was too afraid to run back into the trees and risk an incident where no one would be around to help me. I decided to just risk the chance that I might be faster than them, that I could get into my car quicker than they could do whatever it was that they were going to do to me. I began walking at a very fast clip toward my car while keeping an eye on them. As I got 5 feet from my driver's door, the man made a beeline for me, his blue light hitting me in the eyes. He was right at my trunk, heading for my driver's door when I shut it and locked the doors immediately. The woman walked to the passenger door and just stared at me. The guy did the same at my driver door. I flicked the man off and very obviously mouthed the words "fuck you" in slow motion. I started my car and sped off away from the park and returned home. Then I called my family, who are all in different states than me, and told them that I love them and miss them.
Number 5.
I'm quite a loner and I like to go on walks just to get some me time. This one night, on the 27th of November, I decided to go on another lengthy walk of mine. There was something eerie this time though, so I had a feeling that the 27th of November is a night that something grotesque was going to happen. Boy, was I right. So, at around 2 AM, I was restless and made my way into the cold with the same feeling of dread I had had earlier on in that day. The first hour of my walk was pretty normal and nothing out of the ordinary, but lo and behold, I had a feeling I was being watched. Bearing in mind it was about 3 AM now, I was sitting on a bench that was in a park that wasn't very well lit. Someone else being in the park was very unlikely, as as it's a small town and the only people who would be around at this time are drunk pissheads who do my head in. Anyways, there was no sound coming from a dark figure that caught my eye. He was just standing there, staring in my direction. I looked down at my phone to put my torchlight on and pointed my light towards the dark figure, but to my surprise, he had vanished. Me just being paranoid and extremely tired, I just ignored the weird encounter and decided it would be best to make my way home and get some shut-eye. Placing my phone back into my pocket and lighting up another cigarette, I made my way back to my house but still had the uneasy feeling of someone watching me. I'm normally not easily scared, but this felt different. Like someone had decided to taunt me. I looked behind me to see the same dark-figured man standing right beside a tree just looking my way. Now I know this isn't just something my mind had made up. I shout to the figure, "Hey man, is there a problem?" You could tell there was fear in my voice, but I wasn't going to let this creep get the best of me. No response from him. This is getting weird now. I stood there and my eyes widened. The man got to the floor and started crawling towards me in a manner that I could only describe as insane. The only thing I could hear was this hissing noise, which I presumed was coming from him. I just stood there, wondering what on earth he was going to do to me. In my current state, I just looked at him with fear. As he edged closer, I vaguely noticed something was dangling from his rucksack. I guessed it was some bird or some sort of small creature. Anyway, I didn't want to hang around to find out, so I dashed up a small lane right back to my house. Looking back on the ordeal, maybe I shouldn't have headed straight back to my house as he would know where I lived. But my head was in a messed up place from all the fear that this man had caused me. I ran through my gate to my front door and quickly glanced behind me to find him just standing outside my closed gate. One thing the man said to me will always send chills down my spine to this day.
"One day we'll meet again, and this time you'll be coming home with me."
The events of this night stopped me from going on walks because I still, even to this day, 5 years on, fear that he will come back and take me to some sinister place where he could do whatever the hell he wants to me.
Number 4.
My mother's first husband, Jim, was an asshole. I was 10 when they met at church. She was the new in-town single mum, and he was the boyishly handsome drummer of the worship band, and they struck up a relationship. He wasn't what I would call her type, but I think she liked him because he was a sweet laid-back good old boy. He had a steady job, he was good at fixing things, and he at least made the effort to have a relationship with me. On top of that, he was born and raised in the small town we lived in, friend or family to just about everybody. All in all, he was damn good husband material. Then came the troubles. See, Jim was an alcoholic. When he started courting my mum, the drinking wasn't an issue. He had been upfront with her about his status, but he didn't make it a habit of drinking, at least when we were around, and made it clear that it wasn't a part of his life anymore. That changed after the wedding. Apparently, the stresses of married life are simply too much for any sober man to bear. I've met many alcoholics in my life, most of them related to me, and it's a special sort of dread that washes over you as a child when you suddenly realize you're stuck with another one. I know alcoholics are not inherently bad people, but Jim was a lousy alcoholic. This easygoing guy would turn into a raging asshole after just a few PBRs, and when he decided to drink, he made an event of it. Usually, he would storm out of the house after an argument with my mum and tear off into the night, not to be heard from again for days. He would eventually be discovered on the other side of town at his mother's house, half naked and trashed by the fish pond, working his way through a case of cheap beer and riding into town on a lawnmower for more. Upon his return, he would be the picture of remorse, calling himself scum and beg for forgiveness. Not just with us, but with the good Lord above. That was the thing that always bothered me about Jim, how he always felt the need to bring God into it. If we were having a family meeting specifically to discuss his behaviour, he would insist in leading a prayer first. Every time he needed to explain himself, he mentioned conversing with God on the matter beforehand. To him, God wasn't a saviour, or a beacon of hope, or even a crutch. God was a defense attorney. No matter what kind of shit Jim got himself into, God would be on his side to pull him out. But more than that though, and this is what I truly believe, he only seemed to talk about God's mercy and forgiveness, when, in reality, he needed that from my mother and I, as if bringing up Jesus' love would soften our hearts to his struggle, as if, suddenly, we would remember that we were Christians, and good Christians don't stay mad at their husbands. That strategy worked for a while, but the novelty wore off soon enough. He went to AA meetings now and then. He would come home insisting that he was enlightened, reborn, on the road to being clean, but never attended frequently enough to get results. The marriage lasted 7 tense years, punctuated with stress-induced benders every few months, followed by more empty promises. My mum tried to play the supportive Christian wife for a while, before finally giving up and switching to full-on resentment. Their fights were never physical, but they were ugly, and sometimes they got loud enough that I was worried that someone would throw a punch. Finally, my mother ended things with him. The divorce was quick and quiet, but then I think that they were just tired of each other and were relieved to part ways. She took the house, he took the Chevy Trailblazer, and that was that. My mum recovered nearly overnight and was happy to start her life again. A few months after the divorce, we'd heard that Jim had gotten remarried. Cindy was a friend of ours from church and we had been close for years, though it was no secret to anyone that she had always had a crush on Jim. Cindy had never been married before, barely even dated, and she had landed her dream guy. Honestly, we couldn't have been happier for her. For Jim's part, my mother and I decided to be optimistic. Maybe he'd really clean up his act if he could hook up with such a good sweet woman as Cindy. A few years pass. I'm well into college by this point, and my mum is living with her new man in a different city. It's been at least a year since we've been back to our small town or spoken to anyone there. One day, I get a message from a friend from high school. "Did you hear about Jim?" I asked her to go on, already rolling my eyes at what it could be. As she started telling me what happened, my smugness turned to horror. Jim and Cindy had been having issues for a while, reportedly over money, and I can guess a few other things. The incident started when Cindy went to Jim's trailer. Apparently she had recently moved out and was returning to pick up some things. Cindy's 22-year-old niece was with her to help. Jim had claimed that he was going into rehab, so they were surprised to walk in and see him sitting there drinking on the couch. The couple began arguing, leading to the woman leaving the house and driving away. Drunk and furious, Jim jumped into his truck and took off after them at full speed. He caught up to them and slammed into Cindy's car, knocking it so hard that it flipped and rolled off of the road. Realizing what he'd done, Jim backed away and sped off in the other direction to hide. Cindy was in a critical condition for days before she was finally declared stable, but her niece died instantly. Jim was found hiding out in some farmland a few hours after the incident and was swiftly charged with murder, DUI, and fleeing the scene, among other things. The city's golden boy had just sunk himself into a whole lot of shit, and not even Christ could get him out of this one. This story is awful and upsetting for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being 2 innocent women were so viciously attacked by this drunk idiot. They all happened to be people I knew, but the one thing that still chills me is the car Cindy was driving was a Chevy Trailblazer, the very same Chevy Trailblazer that Jim got in the divorce. My mum's old car, the car I'd learned to drive in. I can only imagine how fast he was going to hit them hard enough to flip it with his little pickup truck. How angry he had to have been not to even hesitate. And I do wonder how many times my mother and I escaped a similar fate.
Number 3.
My house is right next to a forest, where almost every side has the forest next to it. We only have one neighbour in our area, but they're rarely home. Since we live in such a dense forest, and the fact that I'm in Norway, it's pretty much nighttime all day long. We rarely see any sunlight at all in the winter period. What is really creepy though is that the power to our house frequently cuts, which really isn't a surprise or a new thing, since the power goes out almost all the time. But very very strange things start to occur when I'm home alone. It has happened 2 times now, that when the power cuts, it's pitch black, both inside and outside. One time, it was completely dark. I was sitting in my living room on my cell phone, when I suddenly see a flash in my panorama living room window. I take a look outside and see someone at the edge of the woods with a flashlight on his head, I think, looking directly in my window, maybe about 50 meters away. And he's just standing there. I'm a pretty confident guy and not so easily scared around the woods, given that I pretty much grew up here. So I figured I should check up on this guy, since he's on our property. We really don't like people looking in our window, especially not this late in the evening. The power's still out, so I equip my flashlight, my field pants, and my hunting knife, which I always bring for various reasons. I go outside, and I'm heading for the direction where the figure was standing, but there's nothing there. I look around after it, and it's moved further into the woods. I could still see his flashlight. I yelled at him, but no response. I'm kind of jogging towards his position, still trying to get his attention and tell him that people really aren't supposed to walk here. The closer I get, maybe about 100 meters away from my house, and 50 meters away from the figure, I realize something is off. My flashlight is lighting up the area, but it doesn't light up the person. It sort of goes through him. Now, I'm not that close that I can for sure say that the light doesn't illuminate him, but I stopped. This shook me to the bone. This guy casually stared in our window in the middle of a blackout, didn't react to all my call-outs, neither did he walk in a normal pattern. His flashlight was almost hovering, and that's when his light just turned off. He just disappeared, and it was all pitch black again. The only light I could see was from my own flashlight. Still pretty shaken up, I hurry my way back to the house and find out that both of the main ports to our barn were completely open. They're always closed since it's winter, and that the floodlight positioned outside was also turned on, which indicated that the power was back. Not really comfortable with the experience I just had, I decided to go to bed with all of the lights on. I had pretty much forgotten about the whole thing when about a year later, about a week from now, the same shit happened again. The power was out, and again, I was in my living room when I saw the same fucking flash from my window. I peeked outside, and I saw the same fucking glow in the woods opening. I then remembered the occurrence last year, and I just froze. No way in hell was I going out there again. I locked all the doors, got my flashlight and my knife, and locked myself into my bedroom. The power was back on in half an hour or so, and I have never been so afraid. I'm not sure who or what the thing in the woods opening is, or why it only appears when the lights are out, but I'm not sure if I want to know either. The experience didn't make me afraid of the woods. I still roam it late at night, but I am more afraid of being in my house when it's dark. I would much rather be out in the forest.
Number 2.
A few years ago, I lived near a large expanse of national forest that was riddled with small winding trails and a larger set of roads that had been set up for forestry. It was about a half-a-mile walk from my home over to the Red Road, as I like to call it, a relatively well-kept lava rock pathway. Regardless of the season, even in the beginnings of a snowstorm, I still spent at least an hour a day out there. When I got a puppy, I easily integrated him into my walks. Whippets love following a bike, or hitting up a bike trail, sun, rain or snow. He would follow me soundlessly, generally on a leash while near the houses, then off leash when I got deep into the woods. He was like my shadow, and though he would occasionally bound ahead, he would stop and turn back to look at me when he got a bit far ahead. One day, I was out later in the day. The sun was starting to set and it had grown chilly, to the point that I had put a coat on my dog from out of my pack and decided to cut my trip short. As I was nearing civilization, I called my dog to me and leashed him up, thinking that I may have heard a car. We rounded the corner, coming out of the copse of trees and into the open ground. I slow my walk instantly when I see an older black car parked near the entrance where the pavement turns to gravel. People would occasionally park near the entrance, but for some reason, this car causes me to pause. It's a bright black with oversized silver rims and a small spoiler on the back. There's a man with a baseball cap leaning against the open passenger side window. He's gesturing violently to the people in the car, and he speaks to them in angry tones, although I'm too far away to hear what he's saying. But it's enough that I instantly decide to steer clear of the group. Unfortunately, there's no way out but the path that they are parked on. My dog is a little spooked and is pushing against my legs and looking up at me. It doesn't help settle my nerves. I've seen people park there before,